Welcome to the Deep Collaboration Podcast. In this series, we talk to people who are leading the way and making working together smarter and more productive. With me today, I've got Floor Drees, Senior Program Manager at Microsoft and Serial Conference Organizer. Welcome to the show, Floor.
Thank you. Hi, Don.
How are you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm just fine.
Just fine.
Just fine. We have sunny weather here in Amsterdam. I'm sure it's just as sunny in Rotterdam.
Totally.
So tell us a little bit about what you do at Microsoft. What does being a Senior Program Manager mean?
Yeah, so I work in the developer relations organization within Microsoft. I work really closely together with some of our cloud advocates who are basically developer advocates, but of course Microsoft has to give them another name than developer advocate because that's old. And work very much on educational content, trying to upskill developers or technical audience onto our product suite. And what I think is developer relations for me and also at Microsoft is really being an advocate both internally and externally. So I try to listen very carefully to the community externally and to users in our support channels and figuring out what are some of the trends or gaps maybe in our product offering or in our documentation and our content, and try and rally people around filling those gaps and making sure that we're offering all that we can and empowering developers or technical folks by doing so. I'm also pretty involved with product launches and launch events, so making sure that those hit the right audience, that they get the right viewers, and also have the right follow-up. And at a previous company, I've also helped writing release notes and focusing more on sort of the problems that were solved with a particular release, not necessarily exactly what has changed. And so I'm trying to really be the bridge between people that use our products and services and the product teams and documentation teams inside.
Oh, very nice. And so you've helped organize a number of conferences over the years, including Euroko 2019 and Rotterdam and RosConf. How does this connect up to the work that you do at Microsoft?
So you mentioned 2 Ruby conferences, and they don't match up necessarily to the work I do at Microsoft because Ruby is not necessarily a first-class citizen for Microsoft unless something goes wrong, which happened the other day. Probably heard about it. But there's other conferences that definitely do fit into sort of like have some overlap with Microsoft communities and Microsoft goals. So I also organize conferences like DevOps Days, and I've been involved with serverless days, and those are definitely topics that have some sort of like some overlap with what Microsoft is interested in. And then still, I was also totally allowed to spend work hours on Noruko and on RosConf. Noruko was also Noruko is like, oh, this year was pandemic, and so there is no Yoruko. Lovely play of words. But that also helps sort of figuring out how to move online and do so in a sort of profesh manner. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of conferences that have a bit of an overlap, and I can bring maybe Microsoft speakers, or I can, be active in the booth or make sure that people, like at least see Microsoft show up to these things and consistently show up to these things. But also really be in the conference itself and figure out what are things that people are asking questions about to speakers, or what are some of the topics that are apparently like really interesting for participants, and bring those insights back to the company. Also secretly looking at what are the competitors doing, like is Google rocking up to this thing, and if so, like what kind of experience are they offering, and what do we see as the response to them offering that experience, and seeing what we can what we can distill from that. So that's how I'm involved in conferences from like the perspective of working at Microsoft. But I've always organized a lot of tech conferences. I think that's how I went into like the whole sort of developer relations profession. Is that I just as a person really enjoy interacting with other people, learning from other people, and giving people that I think are really smart and have something to say, a platform to do so. So those are like my driving forces for being involved in organizing a lot of conferences, whether or not they overlap with what my business objectives are.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned that the conferences are an opportunity for interactivity, right? And I think many of the best conferences that I've been to are those that sort of facilitate interaction among the participants of the conference and aren't just like a vehicle for a lecture to an audience, right? What does it take to make a conference feel really interactive and provide that kind of value to the attendees?
Yes. So indeed, like you don't want to just listen to someone do a talk and have, I don't know how many slides that they go through. But those can be the sort of spark for a conversation afterwards. So that usually already starts in the Q&A. So if you can have a Q&A, that always helps. But then there's always people, of course, that don't like raising their hands and actually like asking a speaker a question. Maybe they're a little bit, they are a little bit starstruck in some cases if you have like a really big name on stage. So any way to facilitate that discussion later. So we've done like while the next talk is on, the speaker moves to another room and you can approach the speaker there. So you're a little bit in a lower key setting to ask your question. But also have maybe discussion round or have a talk be the sort of intro to a fishbowl discussion so that everybody can join on stage if they have something to say, or have that be the start of a panel discussion. And people will always take, if there's a room to do so, they will take the things that they've just learned about or just heard about and take it to the hallway. That's the famous hallway track, that we all know and love so much, and have discussions there. So you will want to make sure that there's a room where people can just chat. And they don't have to be quiet because there's a talk going on at the same time. So if that can be sort of separated rooms, that's good. That's good. Another thing that really helps is having a good moderator who collects some of those questions, but might also be just someone who intrinsically asks a lot of questions and have them sort of anticipate what kind of questions people might have and might not necessarily ask. So there's also just a lot of people that will have questions, but will never ask them. And if you can anticipate them a little bit and you can read the room a little bit, you can feel a lot of that stuff.
And of course, it helped.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, total sense. It helped that at Uruko 2019, you confined us all to a ship.
Yes, and there was no way of getting off the ship. That's not true.
There was, of course, but it's isolated, like in the very quiet end of Rotterdam, so there wasn't really any place. Well, there were places to go, but
yeah, I mean that is something that you see in some of the larger conferences that are in the center of Amsterdam, right? You lose people just because they will
they walk out the door
and they're gone. And so there's probably something to say for a little bit more remote places, but also just I think it was just a really interesting setting and a really interesting place, and so people also really. Sort of came for that experience, right, of being on a ship. Like, how often have you been on a ship for a conference? Like, tell me, how often?
Once.
Once, just the once.
Just once. Not a habitual cruise taker myself, although that cruise didn't actually leave port, which is
it didn't, but it felt like it, didn't it? At times.
At times.
It did for me.
So how has all of this changed now in this post COVID world, right, where we can't just get on a ship and have a conference anymore? Like, how is this made? How is it? What challenges has this presented for you as a conference organizer? And like, how have you seen interesting ways to overcome these challenges and attempt to recreate some of these features you just talked about?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously a lot changed. I think a lot of people are sad for it, but I do think that virtual conferences offer a lot of opportunities as well. Yeah, you lose a lot of the things that you have in person, and a hallway track is incredibly difficult to sort of translate to online, but it also presents a lot of new opportunities, I feel like. So I have loved in the last year or so the different experiments. So I thought the Deserted Island DevOps conference in Animal Crossing, for instance, was an hilarious experiment. I don't know how much content people took away from it, but I thought it was a really clever way to try and solve a problem for that audience. And I also think that we should not always take ourselves too seriously. So this was a good way to say, like, well, we're all in this together. Like, it totally, I wanted to say something bad, but it's not great. And, but we're trying to make something, something positive out of it. And this is our way to do that. And for DevOps Days Amsterdam, which is I'm organizer for DevOps Days since 2 years. And for this year, we're looking at some ways to sort of have participants be more visible as well, if they wish to do so, and not have last year, I think, judging by the situation we were all in, I think we'd done a good job in translating DevOps Days to online. We worked with different tracks. We worked with different moderators. We tried to bring the open spaces element bring that online. That proved to be really hard. We didn't put the love in it that we would normally do, especially seeing that open spaces is like a integral and vital part of DevOps Days. And it's very much about putting people that care about a topic in the same room and having them, discuss and create value together. And so we're actively looking for a platform where we can try and mimic as much as possible of that in-person open space online. What I've seen is a lot of people are just struggling and trying to find ways to do some of the translation. Opportunity-wise, I think it's become a no-brainer to do recordings of sessions and release those, because we're already, we're already here, we're already streaming, so we have the recording already, and it's been much easier to release those things and much quicker to release those things so that people can watch on demand if they want to, because the conference took place at a time that is not really time zone friendly for them, or they were doing something else. That's so I like that it's become more freely accessible for people to play back talks and so on. In my little bubble, we've been experimenting with sort of studio hubs. So we would put the moderators or hosts or MCs or however you call them in one room together. Of course, limited to the amount of people that we could have in one location, and have them present as it would be, as it would be CNN. So there would be two moderators, two hosts, talking to each other, and introducing the next speaker, and the next speaker would call in, and would appear on the screen, and then we would switch to the speaker. Speaker would do their talk. The host would collect questions from the audience and would relay the questions from the audience to the speaker. We would have a little bit of a conversation. So it wouldn't not only be here's a talk and here's a talk and here's a talk. We're trying to, at least relay some of the things, the comments, the questions from the audience to the speaker, and have a little bit of a live, not rehearsed element to it. And I also want to touch on the incredible work that one of my colleagues has done making events more accessible. Henk Boelman has created an event page sort of platform that is fully accessible. And also we have we have used Azure Media Services to do captioning for our events, for community events. So if we didn't have a lot of budget, because that still costs a little bit of money because it's a VM and everything, but do captioning for those events. And whenever we could get a little bit of budget to add live captioning or sign language interpretation for these events, and also experimenting with where in the screen should be the sign language interpreter, how big should that screen be. It is it's very intense work. So they need to switch every 15 minutes, I believe. And so how to do that switch and how to figure out who from that team, because you need a team of interpreters if you do so, how to make that switch, how they can signal that, they need a little break. That's been incredibly interesting. And I love the investment that we've done there with different camera setups and everything. And that's been super interesting. Also great for some of the conference locations that had a lot less business, of course, over the last year, and now had a way to, in some cases, offer their services of doing the live streaming, taking on the live streaming, for instance, but also having that location with a nice couch and a coffee table, making it look a little bit more homey, like you're streaming into someone's home, that I feel like that has worked really well. What else do I want to mention? I totally want to mention that my colleague Nitya and I have also fought for getting closed captions for the Global Diversity CFP Day streams. I think that's super valuable. I love that event and that initiative anyway. But being able to make it accessible for even more people, I'm super proud that we pulled that off. I love that just virtual events there's been a huge opportunity to make events more accessible. I love all of the work that we've put in there, and I really, really sincerely hope that we can bring that to our in-person events if and when we go to in-person again, or if we go to hybrid events where part of it is online and part of it takes place in watch parties all over the world, for instance.
Do you think being online has facilitated making them accessible? Is it just the tooling is a lot better when you're doing it virtually?
I think we just thought about it in a different way because we didn't think about existing communities that we're already interacting with and we see coming to our user groups already, because you know them and you know their needs. Right. And so, for instance, I'm also part of the Amsterdam Ruby meetup group. We never really thought about having our events be wheelchair accessible until we had a community member who requested that, right? Who needed that. And then suddenly, you start thinking about your events differently. And so when you're going location scouting, that is the first thing you look at. And I think similarly for online events, because the audience or the participants were suddenly different from the ones that you were seeing at your in-person event. You're I don't know. I feel like at least my brain changed a little bit in a way where it's anyone could attend right now, but could they really? And so then you start thinking about, okay, so maybe they can't hear very well, or maybe we need the transcript because the live stream is really bad, and or the audio isn't great. There's all of these situational aspects to it as well. So I think just thinking about the audience being different and wider and, possibly much broader, also makes you think about what they might need. Those needs are different from your in-person audience that you know very well.
So I imagine that this is going to have a lasting impact on the way that you organize conferences in the future.
For me, yes. I think asking for a budget for captions or interpretation is going in there for sure. So we already had sort of diversity scholarships for a lot of the conferences that I work on, so that people that maybe can't afford a ticket and can't afford to travel to, Amsterdam for a conference, so that we can support them and they can still come to the conference and learn and network and interact with other people, because I feel like that's what conferences are for, and that should be accessible to anyone. So we already had the diversity scholarships, but that only takes care of a certain, that takes care of people that can still travel. If they're supported, they can still travel. But now I would love to make it so that also people that can't travel, or for whatever reason, can also access the conference and the content and the network that it brings, the people that it brings, and so that it's not only accessible to the people that happen to live in Amsterdam on a tech budget, because that's a really small set of the people that actually work on the technology that drives our world every day. So it'd be great if everybody could be involved in some way, or at least have access to the information. So that's definitely something that should be, in my idea, front and central to the conference, because that's what a conference is about. And so getting that funded by sponsorship or any other way is definitely something that I will take to when we'll have in-person events again. I really hope that experience is also up to par with the in-person experience. I think some conferences have done a live stream in the past, but it would only be the stream. And there's no way for people that watch the stream to also interact or get their questions in or whatever. So I would love to think about ways to make sure that even if we go back to in-person events, or when we go back to in-person events, because people crave for it, so there's no avoiding it, that we at least take a lot of those lessons and make sure that the remote experience is not treated as an afterthought, but is really like well thought through.
Yeah, that's a great point. What other ways do you see conferences changing as we begin to return to the possibility of meeting again in person?
I think there will be a lot of extra attention to safety, because a lot of people will not feel great or entirely safe just yet. I'm hearing from a lot of folks that they intend to wear masks for the coming years whenever there's a large mass of people. I mean, it will be incredibly awkward, no? Like the first time that you step into another big conference and big, starting at, I don't know, like 300 people, I already feel awkward here when, you know, like there's a big group of people, even if they're all wearing masks and they're outside, I'm still like, ooh.
Yeah.
So it will be really weird in the beginning. And I think we need to accommodate for people to feel comfortable when they're visiting these big events. And so as conference organizers, I think we're even more responsible than we already were for making people feel safe.
Yeah, now I'm starting to wonder now, are ventilation checks going to be part of the standard procedure for scouting a site, right?
Yeah, well, who knows, right? That's a good one. I like that one. Are there going to be like the hand sanitizers on every, like, you know, standing table throughout the conference? Could be, I don't know.
Providing branded paper face masks for attendees who lost theirs somewhere along the way or dropped it.
Could be, I don't know. I'm curious. I don't know. Like, how are we gonna clean the microphone from one speaker to another? I mean, I think we should do that anyway, because it's kind of gross, no? If you think about it, like, we were kind of gross. Yeah.
Yeah. Probably spitting all over this one.
No, but seriously, I mean, if we think about it, I think we were, we were kind of gross. And I do remember also, like, I've been to a lot of the Chaos Computer Club conferences in the past, and I do remember that part of the sort of onboarding emails, or pre-conference emails, included that people should shower every day and they should like wash their hands regularly, and
using soap ideally. This is the Netherlands.
And I thought thinking back, like, if we were already like nudging people to do that or reminding people to do that because we thought they weren't, which, well, okay. How are pre-conference emails going to look like right now? Like, that'd be interesting. And those CCC conferences, I mean, there were really massive. I don't even want to put a number to it, but like 4,000 people in one room. There is the idea of hacker pest. So you will want to take care because you might get sick at a conference like that. And that was only like a very, very mild concern back then, right? And now it will be a concern that is on everyone's mind. And so that might look very different.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how many times in the past I've caught conference cold.
Yes, conference cold is a better word than hacker pest. I'm sorry.
Oh, hacker pest?
Yes.
That sounds awful. Yeah,
it does sound awful.
Conference cold better.
I don't want to get that. I don't want to catch that.
No. And the open buffet is probably done for.
Oh, anyway, also gross. Ugh.
Yeah, that was already kind of a little weird. Well, Floor, I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you.
And thank you for all of the kind insights that you've shared with us on organizing conferences and the way that things have changed, and your views on how things are going in the future. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to our podcast. We're going to drop some links to the things that Floor shared with us, so be sure to check those out below.